still, I don't think us humans would want to admit that there are giants or was giants, because, I mean, it would change everything that we have known through history. You know, and what was say there was giants at one time, even in the United States, like you were talking about Nevada or Midwest, where they even found, remains supposedly of giants. I mean, it would look pretty bad if it showed that the white man came in, right, after we came here, with Columbus, and then slowly, took over the territory, like the whole country. If there were giants, I'm sure they were probably killed off the same way buffaloes were.
Oh, yeah.
I
probably,
think,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, say in the 1760s, 1780s, or whatever, right? You were settling, and you ran into a species of giants. You're going to look at them as abnormal, and, you're going to kill them, or maybe they were going to kill the settlers, It's just so many different ways you can look at it. But, I mean, again, the remains that they have found, okay, and it seems like every few months you read about where they found part of a skull of a giant, or some part of the torso or something. It's just too many places, There's too many places this has happened at. So it tells me that it has to have been real, and I think it not in the biblical times, but I think it's been up to pretty much probably within the last 100 years.
Oh yeah, and that's I get asked a lot of times. Well, if the flood killed everybody except for Noah and his family on the boat, well, where did the giants come from? Because Goliath was a giant, obviously, and there was the Bible does mention other giants after the flood, and of course, and that the Bible is the only book that I've read that. I mean, a lot of these other books, they all have. There's people surviving this deluge other than just the ones on the boat. Some of them go to mountaintops here and there, and so there's other places that some of these people did hide. And if giants, because if the flood story is true, then it would then obviously, well, okay, when maybe one of Noah's son's wives had the giant DNA. In them, and so they got passed on that way. I know I've heard that one as well. One thing, I live in Montana, and there's a place. It's not all that far from here. It's maybe 3 hours away. But they supposedly back in 1904 they found one of these giant skeletons there, and it happens to be in a town that I have some relatives that, in fact, my dad had lived there. And he came up the people that he was working on a ranch that his sister and her husband had, and that's how he came to the town I'm in. They moved up here and bought a ranch, but so I've got to get a hold of some of these relatives before. I mean, because we're talking 1904, so it's going to be what, third-hand information at best.
Yeah.
But still, I'd like to go try to talk to somebody that says, my grandfather used to, he talked about that. And so, I've got to get down there just to see because, that's still, I'd like to get something a little closer to home, but that would help. I mean, it's not as good as your story is when you actually go out and see a Bigfoot and he yells at you and throws a rock at you, because that is amazing. That's kind of
the whole point why I even brought that up is because there are things out there. And, you can have a certain facet, say that it doesn't exist, right? Well, yeah, you can say it doesn't exist if you never saw one. But then if you saw one and you go around telling, like if I went and told everybody I met, hey, I ran into a Bigfoot, how many people think I'm a crackpot? I mean, seriously, you don't go around, like the same thing. You don't, no. Like if you were abducted by a UFO and an alien, if you're real about it, you're not going to be going around and telling people, hey, I was abducted by aliens and taken on a spaceship. You're going to keep your mouth shut because you know, unless you're one of the persons that want to broadcast it because that's what you enjoy doing. But, I mean, the average person isn't going to, bring it up. I would have, like I said, if I wasn't doing this show, and I had Ed Romans on. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's, if you were Canadian, you would know him right away. He's like the #1 folk singer in Canada. And I actually interviewed him for 2 hours back about 2 months ago. He had an encounter with a Bigfoot. And, from everything he told me, without me telling him first about my encounter, it kind of it kind of matched in a lot of ways.
Really? Yeah.
That's how.
I've heard that rock throwing thing before too.
Well, the thing is, that's how I can tell. Like I said, a lot of people want to be a guest on my show, so I started asking them questions. And when they can't answer the right question, especially when, I have so many people that want to be on the show about Bigfoot, and then when I kind of examine them a little bit, then I know they don't know anything about Bigfoot. They, I had one guy insist that Bigfoot is kind, gentle, and all that stuff. Well, everything it showed me on this one, no doubt, no doubt, I'm going to be honest with you. To this day, I feel very strongly if we wouldn't have took off running like we did, I don't think we would ever came back out of that forest. Wow. So whatever we did, we startled it. It didn't want us there. It let us know it didn't want us there. And either it had a mate, that was already by our car, because it was smart enough to know where our car was, because undoubtedly it beat us to where the car was. And it was just waiting for us to get to the car, and it was off the bushes. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is there is things out there that do exist, and the government can tell me it doesn't exist. The scientists down the street can tell me it doesn't exist, and I can look at them and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about unless you see it,
right.
Just like the giants, they can sit and say, well, they haven't existed since Bible times. Okay, I disagree with that, because what you mentioned about Afghanistan, I believe, I heard about that and read a little bit about that a few years ago. And then there's been some other reported cases through the years, people out in the forest system that report they saw a giant, and not a Bigfoot. So, it just makes you wonder, I mean, maybe the Bigfoot isn't so much a Bigfoot. Maybe it's a giant dressed in, bear skins to keep warm. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I was kind of curious what you think the Bigfoot's DNA might be. What do you think that it?
I have no idea. All I know, the thing was way bigger than me, and to bend a tree over like that, and to snap it. I mean, it bent over like a bow till it snapped. And it was enough to scare me to I mean, I had nightmares for years about that. I mean, when you see something that people say it doesn't exist other than what you see on movies, okay? And I look even at the movies, it doesn't even rival what I ran into. They had that TV show, I don't know if it's still on, where they go out and hunt Bigfoot,
Oh, yeah.
You know what? You can go out hunting Bigfoot all you want, right? You're not going to find it. The only way you find it is like my situation. We were out somewhere we shouldn't have probably been, and it was purely accidental. Okay? That's the same way. I mean,
Have you been to, you've heard some of the stories around Mount Shasta? You're fairly close to that probably, aren't you?
Yeah. It's about a state and a half away. Actually, my person who runs our fan page lives right by Mount Shasta, and she's been telling me some things about strange things out there. So,
yeah, I have there's a friend of mine at work that tells me the same thing, and there's actually I have a cousin that lives there, and I need to go, and he invited me to come over and stay for a while. I need to go there because I've heard some very interesting things about. When my puppies come down to say hi. I've heard some very interesting things about Mount Shasta. What did your friend tell you? Anything in specific?
I don't really want to go into it because I know she's listening to the show, but she told me some stuff, and messaged me, that I would think there's some strange things going on. Yeah, I hate to say it, not just there, probably Mount Rainier. The same way, like when I was up in the middle of the Canadian Rockies, out in the middle of nowhere.
I think we have an idea for our next show, one of our shows.
Yeah, but just with giants and stuff, I have a strange suspicion. If they found one back around 2000 something where, where it speared a serviceman, and then they emptied their guns into it to kill it, makes you just kind of wonder. Okay, if one survived there, and the Indians have talked about them being here.
Yeah.
Where else?
Well, and like the one in Afghanistan that they killed. I mean, obviously there can't just be one. I mean, unless it's the last one. I mean, there's got to be, animals, flesh and blood. They're obviously flesh and blood, and they reproduce like any other animal on the planet. So there's more of them.
Yeah, like deep in the forest, up in the mountains. I mean, we haven't spent the time to really look for it. The government has never spent the time or money to go out and do what Hitler did, to go out and check and see what weird things are out there. It'd be interesting if the government would sit there and say, hey, what we're going to do next week? We're going to really check and see if there is such a thing as a Bigfoot. Is there really been giants? I mean, in today's news, they're talking about they found a kind of a new species of like a sea monster thing in the ocean. It's in the news today. So it's always something they're finding new that scientists said, oh, that's extinct, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and then all of a sudden, here it is yet.
Well, and of course, if our government were going to go out and try to find any stories about giants or Sasquatch, and if they did find anything, then of course they wouldn't tell us.
No, but you think about this though. 14,000, and I know that's increased drastically because that report is a couple years old. You think from 1900 to, I think it was like 2013 or 14 when they came up that amount of people missing in the forest system. You're talking a good-sized town, 14,000 people. Again, I can see hunters going out, having a heart attack and just dying somewhere out where no one will find them, or somebody walking off a cliff. But still, there's been too many weird cases where, people, it was like either abducted and then carried, miles away, and then their remains were found, or part of the remains were found. But again, to get that information, the Forest Service police won't give out that information.
They did a movie called The Descent. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's where a bunch of people are living in caves, and these people that want to go into caves to go like caving or whatever, cave exploring, they venture into a cave system, and then all of a sudden they find these creatures in the cave system, and it's a pretty scary movie. Check it out. It's called The Descent.
Well, no, but I'm glad he mentioned that because the Hollow Earth theory, there is possibility there could be giants or some species of race, underground. I mean, it just makes you wonder. There is possibilities.
Oh yeah, you got to look at everything. I just look at everything. Anything's possible. I mean, and I start from there. And they just found that. I don't know how long ago it was, but it was in Vietnam that cave. In Vietnam, I don't think they let hardly anybody into it, but it's almost like what are some of the movies, where they go down into the earth and there's a whole other world down there. But it sounds to me like it's pretty close to something like that. That on the, at least on the face value of it. But you got to. Everything's got to have. You got to have an open mind for everything. I mean, because Edgar Cayce and the Sumerians, and the Book of Giants, talking about all this, like mixing of DNA and DNA, and so if you got humans and animals, I mean, mermaids. I think that first was it Barnum and Bailey, the first when they first had a mermaid on display. There's a lot of reports that people think that might actually have been one.
Yeah, from what I read too, yeah.